8,000 koku. That is what one man was worth to the family that would rule Japan for 2.5 centuries. A koku was the amount of rice it took to feed one person for 1 year. So hold that number in your hand for a moment. 8,000 people, eating for 12 months, signed over to a single commander, in a country where a village headman counted his wealth in sacks. And he was not the expensive part. You have heard 1,000 stories about what a shinobi could do. Almost none of them tell you what one cost. That is strange, because everything else in this century has a price written beside it. Rice has a price, a horse has a price, a matchlock gun coming through the port of Sakai has a price, and somebody somewhere wrote it in a ledger. So what was the going rate for a secret? Start with the word. The men we call ninja did not call themselves that. In their own century, they were shinobi no mono, which means plainly, the ones who endure, the ones who hide.
Different warlords used different names for the same service. The Deikata called them Supa, the Hojo called them Rappa, the Uesugi called them Nokizaru, the monkeys on the eaves. Those are not the names of a mystical order. Those are the names of a trade. And a trade has customers. Now picture the country they came from. Iga is a bowl of rice paddies and steep wooded ridges, ringed by mountains a few days east of Kyoto. Koga sits just over those ridges to the north. Poor country, thin soil, too broken for a great lord to hold, and too awkward to be worth conquering. So the men who lived there governed themselves, not peasants exactly, and not full samurai either, jisamurai, landed fighting farmers, bound into leagues that made decisions by council instead of by lord. They had no rich province to defend, and no daimyo to feed them. What they had was a skill the rest of Japan was suddenly desperate to buy. Here is the first receipt.
In the spring of 1541, a monk at Kankukuji Temple in Nara wrote in his diary that men of Iga had gone into Kasagi Castle by night, set fire to it, and taken the outer keep. That diary is the Tamon-in Nikki, and it is not a legend or a story told a century later. It is a man in a temple writing down what he heard that week, the way you would write down the weather. Read that entry closely and you notice something. The Iga men are outsiders. They arrive, they do the job, and the diary treats their arrival as a thing worth noting, the way you would note that a specialist had come in from another town. Somebody sent for them. Somebody was paying. The diary does not say how much. So you go looking in the manuals because the shinobi did something almost no other secret trade in the world bothered to do. They wrote their working knowledge down. The Bansenshūkai, compiled in 1676 by a man of the Fujibayashi family of Iga. The Shohinki, written in 1681 in Kisho, which is mostly about memory, disguise, and how to read a stranger's face.
These are late books, written down in peacetime by men whose fathers had done the work, and they are the closest thing the trade has to a manual. Open the Bansenshūkai expecting magic, and you will be disappointed. It opens by arguing, at length, that this work is honorable, and it leans hard on a Chinese military classic that was already 2,000 years old, Sun Tzu, and his chapter on the use of spies. Sun Tzu's rule is blunt. Of all the people in an army, none should be more generously rewarded than the spies. There is the answer to the question, and it is not a number, it is a principle. Pay him more than anyone else you employ. Why? Turn it around and you will feel it. This is a man you are sending alone into your enemy's castle with your plans in his head. He walks through the gate as a medicine seller, or a wandering monk, or a saragok performer with a drum. Nobody watches him. Nobody can verify a word he says when he comes back.
And your enemy has money too. The manuals are open about this. The most dangerous person in the whole system is your own agent turned. So the pay is not generosity. The pay is a lock on a door you cannot see. Which raises an uncomfortable thought. If these men were worth that much, why was Iga still poor? Because you are asking about the wrong customer and the wrong price. Watch what these men actually were in peacetime, because it will tell you what a war rate really meant. Iga and Koda men were gunners and fire specialists, prized for saltpeter and powder in an age when both were rare. In quieter years, they walked the roads as traveling medicine peddlers, carrying wooden chests of remedies from village to village, which is one of the few jobs in feudal Japan that lets a man cross provinces year after year and ask questions in every house he enters. The disguise and the day job were the same thing. That is not a trick. That is a business model.
And it means the province was not selling you a man. It was selling you access to a network of roads, families, contacts, and coverage that had taken generations to build. You were not hiring a swordsman for a night. You were renting a piece of a country's nervous system. So the price was never really written in coin to Iga to take it. The League fought him in its own broken country, on its own terms, and threw him out, humiliated. 2 years later, in 1581, his father came instead. Oda Nobunaga did not come to occupy Iga. He came to erase it. Armies entered the province from several directions at once and burned it, valley by valley, temple by temple. The figures usually quoted, tens of thousands of soldiers against a province of a few thousand fighting men, come from the Iranaki, a chronicle written long after the fact, so hold the numbers loosely.
What is not in dispute is the outcome. The Tensho-Iga War ended the League. The homeland of the trade was destroyed by the trade's own reputation. That is the true cost of a shinobi, and it was not paid by the customer. Now here is where the loop closes and where that first number finally makes sense. In the summer of 1582, Nobunaga was killed at Honnoji in Kyoto, and one of his allies, Tokugawa Ieyasu, found himself far from home with a handful of retainers and every road between him and safety full of men who would happily take his head. His way out ran straight through the mountains of Iga, the province that had just been burned to the ground. He got through. The men who took him through were Iga men, guided by Hattori Hanzo, a spear-fighting samurai commander from an Iga family, who directed shinobi rather than being the masked assassin of the films. That crossing is remembered as the Iga-goe, and Ieyasu never forgot it. So he did not hire them again. He bought them permanently.
Around 200 Iga men were taken into Tokugawa service. Hanzo was given 8,000 koku. The men were quartered by the western gate of the great castle at Edo, and 400 years later, that gate is still called Hanzomon, the Hanzo Gate, and so is a subway line that runs under it. That is the number from the beginning of this story, not a fee for a night's work. The price of never having to negotiate again. And notice what it did to them. A hired specialist can walk away, a salaried one cannot. In 1605, after Hanzo's death, the Iga men under his son refused to serve him, and the unit broke down in open protest. The most secretive fighting men in Japan filed what amounts to a labor dispute. The trade had become a job. Follow that job to its end, and it gets quieter still. Koga men died defending Fushimi Castle for Ieyasu in 1600, in a siege everyone in it knew was hopeless. In the winter of 1637 and the spring of 1638, during the Shimabara Rebellion, Koga men were sent to scout the rebel stronghold at Hara Castle.
One of them, of the Ukai family, kept a diary of it. It records slipping into the fortress, stealing provisions and a flag, taking a wound in the dark, and complaining about supplies. It is the last documented field operation of the shinobi in Japanese history, and it reads like an expense report. After that, peace. And peace is what actually killed the trade. There is no market for infiltrators in a country that has stopped fighting. So the men went where the money went. Some became gate guards. In Edo, 100-man musket units drawn from Iga and Koga families stood watch for the shogun, and the Tokyo district where one of those units lived is still called Hyakunin-cho, the 100-man's town. Others made fireworks, which is what a gunpowder specialist does in peacetime. Many went back to the medicine chest and the road. To this day, the old Koga country, now the city of Koka in Shika Prefecture, is a pharmaceutical district. The province that once sold secrets ended up selling stomach remedies. So how much did it cost to hire a ninja? Nobody can hand you an invoice, and anyone who quotes you a clean figure is selling you a story. What the record actually shows is stranger and better. A night's work bought you a fire and a castle. A generous retainer bought you a man who would not sell you. A gate, a stipend, and 200 families bought you a service that never left, and cost those families the freedom that made them worth buying in the first place. Iga's price was Iga. Ask yourself which side of that trade you would have taken. A bag of silver for one night in the dark, walking away free. Or rice every year for the rest of your life, standing at a gate that will carry your commander's name for 400 years, doing what you are told. The next time you are in Tokyo, and you see Hanzo-kan on the map, you will know it is not the name of a legend. It is the name of a receipt.